The war horns had barely stopped echoing across the stone walls when Ronan Ashcombe stood before his gathered pack, blood still drying on his knuckles, victory burning bright in his chest. His warriors roared his name. Banners of his fallen enemies were dragged through the courtyard and set ablaze. This was supposed to be the greatest night of his reign so far, the night his throne finally felt unshakable. Then the great doors of the hall slammed open. Every head turned. The healer, Illyra Vance, walked in without waiting to be announced, without bowing, without any of the customs that governed how one approached an Alpha King on his night of triumph. Her robes were still dusted with dried herbs from her workroom, her hair pulled back in haste, and in her arms she carried something wrapped tightly in white cloth. A small sound came from the bundle, a cry, a baby's cry. The celebration died in an instant. Ronan's closest advisors moved to block her path, but she pushed through them with a strength that surprised everyone watching. She did not stop until she stood directly before the raised platform, where Ronan sat upon his war throne, his betrothed, Lady Seraphine Hale, seated beside him in a gown of deep sapphire, her hand still resting on his arm from a moment ago when she had been laughing at something one of the generals said. Illyra looked up at him. Her eyes were not afraid. They were steady, sure, and sorrowful all at once. "That child is yours," she said. The words did not echo, yet somehow every single person in that hall heard them, as if she had shouted them into the rafters. The music, which had been playing softly in the corner, stopped mid-note. A goblet slipped from someone's hand and shattered against the floor. Nobody moved to clean it. Seraphine's fingers tightened around Ronan's forearm. He felt her nails through the fabric of his sleeve. Ronan rose slowly from his throne, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on the bundle in Illyra's arms, rather than on her face. "What did you say?" "I said this child belongs to you, my king." Illyra did not lower her gaze. "Her name is Ren." Her mother was Mira, the servant girl who worked in the eastern wing of this castle. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Ronan's second in command, a broad-shouldered wolf named Callum Bryce, stepped forward, as if to intervene, but Ronan raised a hand without looking at him, silencing him instantly. "I know no woman named Mira," Ronan said, his voice low and controlled, though something in his chest had gone tight and cold. "I have taken no mate outside my bond to Lady Seraphine. You come into my hall, on this night, with an accusation like this, and you expect me to simply accept it?" "I expect nothing from you, except that you look at her," Illyra said, and before anyone could stop her, she stepped closer and held the baby up, just enough for the firelight to catch the small face peeking out from the cloth. Ronan's breath caught in his throat. He did not want to look. Every instinct told him to turn away, to dismiss this healer as a liar seeking gold or favor, to have his guards escort her out before the scandal could spread further than it already had. But something pulled his gaze downward anyway, some force stronger than his pride, and when his eyes met the baby's, his entire body went still. The child's eyes were the exact shade of storm gray that ran in his bloodline, a color that had passed from his grandfather to his father, and now, it seemed, to him. It was not proof. Eye color alone proved nothing. Half the pack carried some version of that shade. Yet the moment stretched on far longer than it should have, and Ronan found he could not look away. Seraphine stood now too, her spine straight, her expression carved from ice. "Ronan!" Her voice was quiet, meant only for him, though the whole hall strained to hear it anyway. "Tell me this woman is mistaken." He turned to her, and for the first time in the 3 years they had been betrothed, he had no immediate answer to give. "I do not know this child," he said carefully. "I do not know how this healer came to believe what she believes, but I have never broken faith with you, Seraphine. Not once." Illyra did not flinch under the weight of the stares, now aimed at her from every corner of the hall. "I did not come here to break anything, my king. I came because Mira is dead, and before she died, she made me promise that her daughter would know her father, whether he wanted to know her or not." The word dead landed heavier than anything else she had said. "Dead?" Ronan repeated. "She vanished from the castle grounds 7 months ago, while carrying this child. Nobody searched for her, because nobody thought a servant girl mattered enough to search for. I searched anyway. I found her 3 weeks ago, in a village 2 days south of here, already gone, having given birth alone, with only a stranger's help. She asked that stranger to bring the baby to me, before she passed. I raised Ren these last weeks in secret, trying to decide what to do. And tonight, I decided that secrecy has cost this child enough. The hall was so silent now that the crackle of the torches along the walls sounded like distant thunder. Callum finally spoke, his voice careful. My king, this could be a trick. Rival packs have used lower means to shame a throne before a wedding. It is not a trick, Illyra said, and there was something in her tone, a certainty born from grief rather than deception, that made even the skeptical faces in the crowd shift with unease. Ronan studied her for a long moment. He had known Illyra for years. She had healed his wounds after countless battles, had sat by his father's deathbed, had never once, in all that time, given him reason to doubt her honesty. That fact alone unsettled him more than any accusation could. Take her to my private chamber, Ronan said finally, his voice hard now, a king reasserting control over a room that had slipped from his grip. We will speak further away from prying eyes. This hall is not the place to settle a matter such as this. Illyra nodded once and turned to walk toward the side corridor, guards falling into step behind her, though none dared touch the child. Seraphine caught Ronan's arm before he could follow. Her eyes searched his face, looking for something, some flicker of guilt or confusion that might tell her what to believe. Is there truth in this? She whispered. Even a small piece of it? Ronan wanted to say no. He wanted to say it with the same certainty he used when commanding his warriors into battle. But somewhere in the back of his mind, a memory stirred, faint and half-formed, like something glimpsed through fog, a moon-soaked courtyard, a voice he could not place, a bond forming in the dark during a ceremony where faces were never meant to be seen. I don't know, he admitted quietly, and the admission cost him more than any wound he had taken that day. But I intend to find out. Seraphine's hand slipped from his arm. She said nothing more, but her silence spoke louder than any accusation Illyra had made. The court began to whisper the moment Ronan's back was turned, voices low but urgent, spreading the story faster than any messenger could have carried it. By morning, every corner of the kingdom would know that the Alpha King's celebration had ended, not in triumph, but in scandal. Ronan followed Illyra down the long corridor leading to his private chamber, his mind racing through every possible explanation, every ceremony, every night he might have forgotten, searching for anything that could explain the child now resting so easily in the healer's arms, as if she had always belonged there. He did not yet know that this single moment, this one sentence spoken in front of his entire court, would unravel every certainty he had built his reign upon, and force him to choose between the crown he had fought so hard to secure and a truth he was not yet ready to face. The heavy door closed behind them, sealing away the noise of the hall, but not the storm that had already begun. Inside the chamber, firelight flickered against stone walls lined with old tapestries, depicting his ancestors, kings, who had ruled before him, each one watching silently, as if waiting to see what kind of king he would prove to be. Ronan sat down slowly, gesturing for Illyra to do the same, though she remained standing, cradling Ren against her chest. Start from the beginning, he said. Everything. Leave nothing out. Illyra drew a steadying breath, glancing once toward the sleeping child in her arms, before she began the story that would change everything. Outside the chamber, Seraphine stood alone in the corridor, her back pressed against the cold stone wall, her composure finally cracking now that no one could see her. She pressed a hand to her mouth, holding back the sound that wanted to escape, and stared at the closed door, as though she might see through it if she looked hard enough. Whatever truth waited on the other side, she knew her future, and the fragile peace her marriage was meant to secure between two warring packs, now hung entirely on what Ronan chose to do next. For the first time since she had agreed to this match, Seraphine felt truly afraid of what tomorrow might bring. Ronan sat in silence for a long moment after Illyra finished speaking. The fire crackled beside them, throwing shifting light across the stone floor, and somewhere in the depths of the castle, a clock struck the late hour. Ren stirred faintly in Illyra's arms, but did not wake. You are telling me, Ronan said slowly, that during the moon ceremony held last spring, I took part in a ritual I do not remember, with a woman I never saw, and that ritual created a bond strong enough to produce a child. I am telling you what Mira told me before she died, Illyra said. She said she went to the ceremony that night at the request of her mistress, who could not attend and did not wish the invitation to go to waste. She said she wore a mask, as tradition requires, and that she was paired that night with a man whose voice she never forgot, though she never saw his face either. The moonblind ceremony has not been practiced properly in this castle for a decade, Ronan said, almost to himself. It fell out of favor after my father's time. I attended one, yes, but only because the elders insisted the tradition be honored once more, before decisions were made about my marriage. I did not expect anything to come of it. I was told my partner that night was chosen and vetted by the council. Perhaps she was, Elira said. Perhaps something changed after the pairing was made. Perhaps someone diverted the arrangement without your knowledge. Ronan's jaw tightened at the implication. Someone within his own council, someone he trusted, might have altered the ceremony's outcome without telling him. The thought settled into his stomach like a stone. Why would anyone do such a thing? He asked. I do not know, Elira admitted, but I know Mira did not lie to me. She had no reason to. She asked nothing of me, except that I protect her daughter, and that I make certain the truth reached you eventually, when the time was right. I believe that time is now, my king, whether it is convenient or not. Ronan rose from his seat and walked to the narrow window overlooking the courtyard below, where the last of the celebration fires were being extinguished by servants moving quietly through the dark. He thought of the night Elira described, trying to pull the memory forward from wherever it had buried itself. Fragments came to him slowly, disjointed and strange, like pieces of a dream half-remembered upon waking. He remembered standing in the moonlit clearing behind the old shrine, the traditional mask cool against his skin, unable to see more than shapes and shadows through the narrow eye slits cut into the fabric. He remembered a voice, soft and uncertain, greeting him with words he could no longer recall exactly. He remembered the warmth of another presence beside him, and a bond forming in the way that only true mate bonds could form, quiet and undeniable, settling into his chest, like something ancient waking up after a long sleep. He had believed, in the days that followed, that the woman behind that mask had been carefully chosen by the council to be tested as a potential match before his engagement to Seraphine was finalized. He had been told the match did not take, that the woman herself had declined to pursue anything further. He had accepted that explanation without question, too consumed by the demands of his father's failing health and his own preparation to take the throne to think further on it. Now, standing here with Elira's words ringing in his ears, he wondered if that explanation had been a lie, crafted to bury a truth someone did not want him to know. Bring the child closer, he said quietly, without turning from the window. Elira crossed the room and stood beside him, angling Ren so he could see her face clearly, in the moonlight streaming through the glass. Ronan studied her features for a long time, searching for anything that might confirm or deny what his instincts already suspected. She has your mother's chin, Elira said softly. I noticed it the first time I held her. I did not want to believe it either, my king, but the resemblance grew clearer every week. Ronan said nothing, though something in his chest tightened painfully at the mention of his mother, who had passed when he was young, leaving behind only a handful of portraits and second-hand memories from those who had known her. A knock sounded at the door. Callum entered without waiting for permission, his expression grim. My king, word is already spreading through the lower halls. By morning, every pack allied with us will have heard some version of tonight's events, and not all of them will hear the truth. Then we will need to decide what the truth is before they do, Ronan said, turning from the window at last. And Lady Seraphine? Callum asked carefully. Ronan's expression darkened. Where is she now? In her chambers. She asked not to be disturbed. Ronan exhaled slowly, running a hand across his face. The weight of the night pressed down on him harder than any battle ever had. He had faced armies without hesitation, yet the thought of facing Seraphine's questions he still could not fully answer, unsettled him in a way he had not expected. I need to speak with the council at first light, Ronan said. Someone arranged that ceremony's outcome, and I intend to learn who and why. Until then, the child stays under guard, protected at all times. If someone tampered with that ritual once, I will not risk them finishing whatever they started. Elira's grip on Ren tightened protectively. Thank you, my king. Do not thank me yet, Ronan said. This is far from settled. Callum lingered after Elira had been escorted to a guarded chamber down the hall, his expression troubled. You believe her? I believe the bond I felt that night was real, Ronan said. Whether this child is truly mine remains to be proven, but I will not dismiss it without looking further. Too much does not add up, Callum. The council told me the pairing failed. If Mira carried my child, then someone lied to me, and I want to know who and why they thought it wise to hide something this significant from their king. Callum nodded slowly. I will begin asking quiet questions among the staff who were present that night. Someone will remember something. Do it carefully, Ronan warned. If someone within these walls is capable of hiding a child's existence for this long, they are capable of far worse to keep their secret buried. Long after Callum had gone, Ronan remained awake, staring into the dying embers of the fire, turning the fragments of memory over and over in his mind, searching for the piece that would make everything fit together. Somewhere down the hall, behind a guarded door, his daughter slept peacefully, unaware of the storm her existence had already begun to stir. And somewhere else in the castle, Seraphine sat alone with her own thoughts, wondering whether the man she had agreed to marry was still the man she believed him to be, or whether tonight had revealed a stranger wearing a familiar face. Ronan did not sleep that night. He sat with his thoughts until the first gray light of dawn crept over the horizon, and when it finally did, he rose with a single resolve fixed firmly in his mind. Whatever truth waited to be uncovered, he would find it, no matter who it implicated or what it cost him. By morning, the castle felt like a different place entirely. Servants who once greeted Ronan with easy smiles now lowered their eyes when he passed, whispering the moment they believed themselves out of earshot. Word of the healer's declaration had spread exactly as Callum predicted, twisting and growing with every retelling, until half the kingdom believed some version of the story that bore little resemblance to what had actually happened. Seraphine did not appear at the morning gathering of the court. Her absence spoke as loudly as any words could have, and Ronan felt the weight of it settle over the hall like a fog that refused to lift. He called his council together in the smaller meeting chamber, away from the prying ears of the wider court, and laid out exactly what he expected of them. I want to know who organized the moonblind ceremony last spring, he said, standing at the head of the long table, his voice hard and commanding. I want the names of every elder involved in selecting participants, and I want to know why I was told my pairing had failed, when it seems it did not fail at all. The elders exchanged uneasy glances. An older wolf named Garrick, who had served on the council since Ronan's father's time, cleared his throat. My king, the ceremony records from that night were sealed, as is tradition. Revealing pairings after the fact violates the very purpose of the ritual. The purpose of the ritual does not extend to concealing a child's existence from her own father, Ronan said sharply. Someone in this room, or someone connected to this room, made a decision that night to keep information from me, and I intend to find out who. Garrick's expression flickered, just briefly, before he composed himself again. Ronan noticed it, filed it away, and continued speaking without acknowledging it directly. I want the sealed records brought before me by evening, Ronan continued. If someone here refuses, I will consider that refusal itself an admission of guilt. The council dispersed quickly after that, murmuring among themselves as they filed out of the chamber. Ronan remained behind with Callum, watching the door close before either of them spoke again. Garrick knows something, Callum said quietly. I noticed the same, Ronan replied. But knowing something and orchestrating it are two very different things. Watch him closely. Do not confront him yet. Meanwhile, in a quiet chamber on the opposite side of the castle, Illyra sat with Ren, cradled against her chest, watching the child sleep, while her own mind raced through everything that had happened since the previous night. She had expected anger from the king. She had expected denial, even hostility. She had not expected the quiet, methodical determination she had seen in his eyes when he studied his daughter's face by moonlight. A soft knock came at her door. She rose carefully, still holding Ren, and opened it to find Seraphine standing in the corridor, dressed simply, without any of the jewels or fine fabrics she usually wore. Her eyes were red-rimmed, though her posture remained perfectly composed. May I come in? Seraphine asked. Illyra hesitated only a moment before stepping aside to let her enter. Seraphine's gaze immediately went to the sleeping child, and something in her expression softened despite the pain still evident beneath the surface. I did not come here to cause trouble, Seraphine said, settling into the chair Illyra offered. I came because I need to understand what happened, from someone who is not the king, and who has no reason to protect him from the truth. Elira studied her carefully before answering. I have no reason to protect anyone except this child, my lady. I will tell you exactly what I told him. Seraphine listened in silence as Elira recounted everything. The ceremony, Mira's disappearance, the months spent searching, the final desperate promise made at a dying woman's bedside. When Elira finished, Seraphine sat quietly for a long moment, staring at her own hands folded in her lap. He did not know, she said finally, more to herself than to Elira. Whatever else is true, I believe that part. Ronan is many things, but he has never been a liar, not to me. No, Elira agreed. I do not believe he knew either. Then someone else arranged this, Seraphine said, her voice hardening with sudden clarity. Someone who benefits from disrupting our alliance, or from ensuring Ronan never learned the truth about that night. That is what he suspects as well, Elira said. Seraphine rose from her chair and walked to the window, staring out at the courtyard below, where guards moved in their usual patrols, unaware of the quiet crisis unfolding within the castle walls. Our marriage was never a matter of love, Elira. It was a matter of peace between two packs that spent decades tearing each other apart. If someone wanted to prevent that peace from taking hold, sabotaging Ronan's reputation on the very night he should have been celebrating his greatest victory would be an effective way to do it. You believe this was aimed at the alliance itself? Elira asked. I believe it is worth considering, Seraphine said, though I do not yet know who would gain enough from our failure to risk something this elaborate. She turned back to face Elira, her expression firm, despite the exhaustion visible beneath her eyes. Whatever happens between Ronan and myself, that child did not ask to be born into this mess. She deserves protection, regardless of how the politics unfold. Thank you, my lady, Elira said, genuinely surprised by the offer. Do not thank me yet, Seraphine said, echoing without knowing it the same words Ronan had spoken the night before. I have not yet decided what I intend to do about any of this, but I will not stand by and let an innocent child become a casualty of someone else's scheme. As Seraphine left the chamber, her mind already turning over the puzzle of who might have orchestrated the entire affair, Ronan sat alone in his study, poring over the ceremony records that had finally been delivered under protest by the council elders. Page after page listed names in careful script, pairings recorded in code so that even the written records preserved the anonymity the tradition demanded. He searched for any reference to himself, any notation that might reveal who had truly stood beside him that night behind the mask. He found nothing conclusive, only a single line that had been altered, the ink slightly different from the surrounding entries, as though someone had gone back after the fact and changed what was originally written. His pulse quickened as he studied the alteration more closely, tracing the edges of the ink with his finger. Someone had tampered with these records after the ceremony took place. Someone with access to the sealed archive. Someone with enough authority to enter without raising suspicion. The list of who fit that description was disturbingly short. Ronan closed the ledger slowly, his mind already forming the next steps he would need to take. Whoever had done this had covered their tracks carefully, but not carefully enough. A single altered line was enough to prove that something had been hidden, and where there was proof of concealment, there would eventually be proof of who had done the concealing. He rose from his desk and walked to the window, watching the sun climb higher over the castle grounds, illuminating a day that had begun in scandal, and would end, he suspected, in revelations far larger than anyone yet realized. Somewhere within these walls, someone had made a choice that shattered lives without a second thought, and Ronan intended to make certain that choice came with consequences severe enough to match the damage it had caused. 3 days passed before Seraphine finally agreed to speak with Ronan directly. She chose the garden behind the eastern wing for their conversation, a place away from the eyes and ears of the court, where the only witnesses were rows of late-blooming flowers and a fountain whose steady trickle offered the illusion of privacy. Ronan arrived first, pacing along the gravel path until he heard her footsteps approaching. When he turned, he found her dressed simply again, her expression composed but distant, as though she had built a wall between them sometime over the last few days that she was not yet ready to take down. You wanted to speak with me, Ronan said. I wanted to understand where we stand, Seraphine replied, stopping a careful distance away from him. The court is already whispering that our engagement is finished. Some believe you will set me aside to legitimize your daughter. Others believe I will break the alliance myself out of wounded pride. I would like to know which version is closer to the truth before I decide anything. Neither version is true unless you choose to make it true, Ronan said. I have not asked you to step aside, Seraphine. I have no intention of abandoning our alliance over something I did not knowingly do. And the child? Seraphine asked. What becomes of her? She is mine, Ronan said firmly. Whatever happened that night, whoever arranged it, the bond I felt when I held her was real. I will not deny my own daughter, simply because her existence proves inconvenient. Seraphine studied him for a long moment, searching his face the way she had searched it the night of the celebration, looking for any sign of deception. She found none, only the same steady conviction she had come to recognize as fundamental to his character over the years of their engagement. I do not fault you for the ceremony, she said finally. Traditions exist for reasons beyond either of our control, and I know enough of the moonblind ritual to understand that neither participant chooses who stands beside them. What I fault, if I fault anything, is the possibility that someone within our own walls orchestrated all of this to damage what we are trying to build together. That is exactly what I intend to uncover, Ronan said. Callum has been asking careful questions among the staff who served that night. Garrick's reaction during the council meeting suggested he knows more than he has admitted. Then let me help, Seraphine said, surprising him. I have my own connections within the court, people who trust me, and would not think twice about sharing information with your betrothed that they might hesitate to share directly with their king. If someone is working against us, I want to know who, as much as you do. Ronan studied her for a moment, weighing her offer. Why would you help me uncover something that could just as easily justify walking away from our engagement entirely? Because walking away solves nothing, Seraphine said simply. If someone is capable of orchestrating something this elaborate to disrupt an alliance meant to end decades of conflict between our packs, that person remains a threat, regardless of whether you and I remain engaged. I would rather face that threat directly than run from it and leave the danger unresolved. Something in Ronan's chest eased slightly at her words, a tension he had not fully realized he was carrying until it began to loosen. Thank you, he said quietly. I did not expect this kind of strength from you. Not after everything. You underestimated me then, Seraphine said, the faintest hint of a smile touching her lips for the first time since the celebration. I did not agree to this engagement because I am weak, Ronan. I agreed because I believe in what our alliance could build, and I do not intend to let anyone tear that down without a fight. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps on the gravel path. Callum appeared around the corner of a tall hedge, his expression urgent. My king, forgive the intrusion, but you need to see this immediately. Ronan exchanged a glance with Seraphine before following Callum back toward the castle, Seraphine matching their pace without hesitation. Callum led them to a small chamber near the archive room, where the ceremony records had been stored, and inside, waiting nervously, stood a young servant girl, who had clearly been crying. Tell them what you told me, Callum said gently. The girl, whose name Ronan recognized as Talia, one of the maids who worked in the eastern wing alongside Mira, wrung her hands together as she spoke. I did not want to say anything before, my king. I was afraid. But I heard something the night before Mira disappeared, and I have carried the guilt of my silence ever since. Go on, Ronan said gently, sensing her fear and trying to soften his tone. I heard Lord Garrick speaking with someone in the archive room late at night, weeks after the ceremony took place. I could not see who he spoke with, only that the voice was familiar, someone who worked closely within the castle. I heard him say that the pairing needed to be erased from the records before anyone learned the truth. I did not understand what he meant at the time. I only understood after Mira vanished a few weeks later that something terrible must have happened. Ronan's jaw tightened at the confirmation of what he had already begun to suspect. Why did you not come forward sooner? I was afraid, my king, Talia said, tears welling in her eyes again. Lord Garrick holds great influence within the castle. I did not believe anyone would take the word of a servant girl over a respected elder, and I feared what might happen to me if I spoke against him and was not believed. You have my protection now, Ronan said firmly. Nothing will happen to you for telling the truth. Seraphine stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Talia's shoulder. You did the right thing coming forward, even if it took time to find the courage. That courage matters more now than any delay. Talia nodded gratefully, wiping at her eyes, as Callum led her aside to record her statement more formally for the council's eventual review. Once she had gone, Ronan turned to Seraphine, his expression grim but resolute. Garrick tampered with the records. He silenced whoever helped him do it, likely the same person or persons responsible for Mira's disappearance and eventual death. Then it is time we confronted him directly, Seraphine said. Not yet, Ronan replied, his mind already working through the necessary steps. If Garrick suspects we know the truth before we have enough evidence to hold him fully accountable, he may destroy whatever remains of the proof, or worse, he may flee entirely and take his secrets with him. We need to move carefully, gathering everything we can before we act. Seraphine nodded in agreement, though the fire in her eyes made clear that patience did not come easily to her in this moment. Then let us move quickly, Ronan. Every day Garrick remains free is another day he might cover his tracks more thoroughly, or worse, decide that further silence requires further harm to anyone who might expose him. Ronan felt the truth of her words settle over him with uncomfortable weight. Somewhere within these walls, a man he had trusted for years had orchestrated a scheme that cost a young woman her life and nearly cost his daughter her chance at ever knowing her father. The investigation had only just begun, but already Ronan understood that the path ahead would require every ounce of resolve he possessed to see justice done properly. Elira had not slept properly in days. Between caring for Ren and carrying the weight of secrets she had held for months, exhaustion pressed heavily against her shoulders. Yet when Ronan requested a private audience with her that evening, she straightened her robes, gathered Ren gently into her arms, and made her way to his study without hesitation, sensing that the conversation ahead would matter greatly to everything still unfolding. "Sit," Ronan said when she entered, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. He had dismissed the guards for privacy, and only Callum remained, standing quietly near the door. Elira settled into the chair, adjusting Ren against her shoulder. "You wish to speak with me, my king?" "I want to know everything about Mira," Ronan said. "Not just the ceremony, not just her final days. I want to understand who she was, who she trusted, and who might have wanted her gone badly enough to arrange her disappearance." Elira nodded slowly, gathering her thoughts before beginning. Mira came to the castle 5 years ago, seeking work after her family fell on hard times in a village to the south. She was quiet, hard-working, well-liked among the staff, though she kept mostly to herself. She had few close friends, myself included, among the small number she trusted. "Did she ever mention Garrick?" Ronan asked. Elira's expression flickered with surprise. "Lord Garrick? Only in passing. She served meals in the halls near his chambers occasionally, as part of her duties, but I never sensed anything unusual in how she spoke of him. We have reason to believe he tampered with the ceremony records after learning of her pregnancy," Ronan said. A witness overheard him discussing the need to erase the pairing from the archive. Elira's face paled slightly. Then he knew. He knew before anyone else that Mira carried your child, and he chose to bury that truth, rather than bring it forward. "It seems that way," Ronan confirmed. "What I do not yet understand is why. What does Garrick gain from hiding this, from potentially arranging her disappearance and death?" Elira sat quietly for a moment, turning the question over in her mind. "Garrick has always been deeply invested in the alliance between your pack and Lady Seraphine's people. He lost family members during the wars between our packs, decades ago, before either of us were born. He has spoken often, in council meetings, about how vital lasting peace is, to prevent such losses from repeating. If he believed Mira's child threatened that alliance," Callum said slowly, speaking for the first time since the conversation began, "he may have decided that erasing the pairing, and eventually erasing Mira herself, was a necessary sacrifice to protect something he considered far more important than one servant girl's life." The room fell silent as the weight of that realization settled over everyone present. Ronan felt anger building steadily in his chest, hot and sharp, at the thought that a man he had trusted for years believed he had the right to decide whose life mattered enough to protect, and whose did not. "He had no right to make that choice," Ronan said, his voice low and controlled despite the fury simmering beneath the surface. "Whatever his reasons, whatever cause he believed he was serving, he took a life and hid a truth that was never his to hide." "What will you do?" Elira asked quietly. "I need proof strong enough to hold before the full council," Ronan said. "Talia's testimony alone may not be sufficient, given her fear and the influence Garrick holds. I need to find whoever helped him carry out Mira's disappearance. Whoever accompanied the voice Talia overheard that night in the archive. I may be able to help with that, Illyra said, straightening slightly as a memory surfaced. When I found Mira in the southern village, the stranger who had helped her during childbirth mentioned a man who had visited Mira shortly before she fled the castle grounds. She described him as tall, with a scar along his jaw, and said Mira seemed frightened of him, though she would not explain why. A scar along his jaw, Ronan repeated, searching his memory for anyone matching that description among the castle's staff and guards. I believe I know who that might be, Callum said slowly. There is a guard named Perrin, who served under Garrick's personal command for several years. He carries a scar along his jaw from an old training injury. I have always found him somewhat unsettling, though I never had reason to suspect him of anything beyond simple gruffness. Bring him in for questioning, Ronan said immediately, quietly. I do not want word reaching Garrick before we have a chance to learn what Perrin knows. Callum nodded and moved toward the door, pausing only to glance back at Ronan. And if he refuses to cooperate? Then we will find other means of persuasion, Ronan said grimly. A woman is dead, Callum. My daughter nearly grew up never knowing her father, all because someone decided their political calculations mattered more than an innocent life. I will not allow that decision to go unanswered. Once Callum had gone, Illyra remained seated, watching Ronan carefully. You care for her, she said softly. Ren, I mean. More than you expected to, I think. Ronan's expression softened slightly, as his gaze moved to the sleeping child in Illyra's arms. I did not expect to feel anything at all, if I am honest. I believed, when you first walked into that hall, that this was some elaborate deception, meant to embarrass me before my court. But the moment I looked at her, something in me recognized her as my own, before I even understood how that could be possible. The bond does not lie, Illyra said gently. Even when circumstances surrounding it remain uncertain, the bond between parent and child forms honestly, regardless of how it came to be. Ronan reached out carefully, and Illyra shifted Ren just enough to let him take her gently into his arms. The child stirred but did not wake, settling instead into the warmth of her father's hold, as though she had always belonged there. Ronan stared down at her small face, feeling something shift permanently within his chest, a certainty settling into place that no council decision or political calculation could ever undo. Whatever it costs me, he said quietly, more to himself than to Illyra, she will know she was wanted. She will know her mother's sacrifice was not made in vain. Illyra watched him with quiet approval, sensing in that moment that whatever chaos still lay ahead, the child in Ronan's arms had already found the protection she needed most. Perrin did not cooperate easily. Brought quietly into a windowless room deep within the castle's lower levels, he denied any knowledge of Mira's disappearance for nearly an hour, his responses growing increasingly rehearsed with each repeated question. Ronan watched from a shadowed corner, letting Callum handle the initial questioning, studying the guard's body language for any crack in his composure. It was Seraphine's arrival, unannounced and unexpected, that finally broke through Perrin's careful denials. She entered the room without hesitation, her presence commanding immediate attention despite her simple attire. I understand you served Lord Garrick faithfully for many years, she said, circling the table where Perrin sat. Loyalty is admirable, Perrin, but loyalty to a man who has committed murder is not loyalty at all. It is complicity. I have done nothing wrong, Perrin insisted, though his voice wavered slightly. Then you will have no objection to telling us exactly where you were the night Mira left the castle grounds, Seraphine pressed. A witness places a man matching your description, visiting her shortly before her disappearance. She was frightened of you, Perrin. Frightened enough that she fled, rather than remain here. Perrin's jaw tightened, his eyes darting briefly toward the door, as though calculating some possibility of escape that did not exist. Lord Garrick told me it was necessary, he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. He said the Alliance could not survive a scandal like this, that too many lives depended on the peace between the packs holding steady. He told me to convince her to leave quietly, to take payment, and disappear somewhere far from the castle, where no one would ask questions. Convince her how? Ronan asked, stepping forward from the shadows for the first time. Perrin flinched at the sight of his king, some of his earlier defiance crumbling entirely. I only meant to frighten her into leaving willingly, my king. I swear I never intended her harm. I gave her coin, and told her to go far south, to start a new life, where no one would know her connection to the castle. I did not know she was already carrying a child, until after she had already gone. And when you learned? Seraphine asked sharply. I told Lord Garrick, Perrin admitted. I believed he would send aid, or at least ensure she was safe somewhere. He told me the matter was handled, that I need not concern myself further. I did not learn of her death until weeks later, and by then, I feared coming forward would only implicate me in something I never intended. Ronan felt a cold fury settling over him, quiet but absolute. You drove a frightened young woman, carrying my child, out of the only home she had, and then abandoned any responsibility for what happened to her afterward. I am sorry, my king, Perrin said, his voice breaking. I did not know the full truth of what Lord Garrick intended. I believed I was protecting the alliance, not condemning an innocent woman to die alone, in a village far from any help she might have needed. Your intentions do not undo the harm you caused, Ronan said flatly. You will remain in custody until the full council convenes to determine your punishment. Cooperation now may lessen the severity of what awaits you, but it will not erase what you have done. Perrin lowered his head, offering no further argument, as guards led him away to a secured chamber. Once he had gone, Ronan turned to Seraphine, who stood with her arms crossed, her expression a careful mixture of satisfaction and lingering anger. We have enough now, she said. Talia's testimony, Perrin's confession, the altered records in the archive. Garrick cannot explain away all of this at once. No, Ronan agreed. He cannot. They found Garrick in the council chamber that evening, reviewing reports with the same calm, unhurried demeanor he had maintained throughout his years of service. He looked up as Ronan and Seraphine entered together, flanked by Callum and several guards, and something in his expression shifted immediately, recognizing the gravity written across their faces before a single word had been spoken. My king, Garrick said carefully, rising from his seat. To what do I owe this visit? Perrin has confessed, Ronan said, his voice deceptively calm. He has told us everything, Garrick. The payment given to Mira, the pressure to leave quietly, your instruction that the matter be handled and never spoken of again. Garrick's composure cracked slightly, though he attempted to maintain it. My king, whatever Perrin has claimed, I assure you my intentions were only ever to protect this kingdom from unnecessary scandal. The alliance with Lady Seraphine's people means everything to the future stability of our lands. I could not allow a single indiscretion to threaten decades of hard-won peace. A single indiscretion, Seraphine repeated, her voice sharp with disbelief. You are describing a woman's death, Garrick, a child left without her mother. You speak of these tragedies as though they were minor inconveniences, in service of your grander plan. I never intended her death, Garrick said, his voice rising with something between desperation and genuine distress. I believed Perrin's payment would ensure she found safety elsewhere, that she would build a quiet life, far from the complications her pregnancy created. I did not order her harm, my king. I swear this to you. Whether you ordered it directly, or simply allowed circumstances to unfold, without concern for the consequences, the result remains the same, Ronan said. You altered sacred ceremony records, concealed my own child's existence from me, and set in motion the events that led to an innocent woman's death, all without a single thought toward consulting me on a matter that concerned my own bloodline. Garrick's shoulders sagged, the fight finally draining from him as he recognized the futility of further denial. I did what I believed necessary to protect this kingdom, my king. I have served this pack faithfully for decades. I ask only that you remember that service when deciding my fate. Your service does not erase your crimes, Ronan said coldly. You will be stripped of your title and held for judgment before the full council. Whatever loyalty you believe you demonstrated toward this kingdom's peace, you demonstrated far greater disloyalty toward its people, and toward the basic principle that no life is expendable in service of political convenience. Guards moved forward to escort Garrick from the chamber, his once proud posture now bent with the weight of exposure and inevitable consequence. Ronan watched him go, feeling no satisfaction in the moment, only the heavy certainty that justice, however necessary, would not undo the damage already done. Seraphine moved to stand beside him as the chamber emptied, her hand finding his without hesitation. It is not over yet, she said quietly, but we have taken the first true step toward setting things right. Ronan nodded, though his thoughts had already turned toward the sleeping child waiting in Alira's care. and the long road still ahead before her existence could be honored properly, without the shadow of scandal and deception hanging over her future. With Garrick held for judgment and Perrin's confession recorded formally before the council, the immediate crisis of uncovering the truth had passed, yet a new challenge now faced Ronan, one far more delicate than any investigation. He needed to formally acknowledge Ren before the court, to remove any lingering doubt about her place within the kingdom, and to do so in a manner that honored Mira's memory, rather than treating the entire affair as a scandal, to be quietly managed and forgotten. He called Alira to his study early one morning. Ren settled contentedly in a small basket beside the healer's chair as the two of them discussed the ceremony he intended to hold. "I want the entire court present," Ronan said. "Not a private acknowledgement hidden away from public view, but a full ceremony, recognizing her as my daughter and heir, alongside whatever children Seraphine and I may eventually have together." "That is a bold decision, my king," Alira said, though approval was evident in her tone. "Some among the nobility will not welcome a child born outside sanctioned circumstances being elevated to such a position, regardless of the ceremony's unusual nature." "Let them object," Ronan said. "I will not hide my daughter away, out of fear of gossip, not after everything her existence has already cost. Mira died believing her daughter might never know her father. I intend to make certain the entire kingdom knows exactly who Ren is, and exactly how much her mother sacrificed to ensure she survived." As if summoned by the conversation, Seraphine appeared in the doorway, having been informed by a servant that Ronan wished to discuss the coming ceremony. She entered quietly, her eyes immediately drawn to the basket where Ren lay watching the world with wide, curious eyes. "You wish to include me in these plans?" she asked. "I wanted your thoughts," Ronan admitted. "This affects you as much as it affects me, Seraphine. If we proceed with our engagement, Ren will become part of your life as well, regardless of how unconventional her arrival into this family has been." Seraphine crossed the room and knelt beside the basket, studying the baby's face with an expression Ronan could not quite read. Ren reached up instinctively, small fingers curling around one of Seraphine's offered hands, and something in Seraphine's careful composure finally softened completely. "She is innocent in all of this," Seraphine said quietly. "Whatever pain her existence has caused, whatever complications she represents for our alliance, she did not choose any of it. She deserves a family that protects her, regardless of how unusual the circumstances of her birth may be." "Does that mean you intend to remain in our engagement?" Ronan asked carefully. Seraphine looked up at him, her expression steady despite the vulnerability evident beneath the surface. "I intend to build something honest between us, Ronan. Not the arrangement we entered originally, built purely on political necessity, but something stronger, founded on truth rather than convenient silence. If you are willing to build that with me, then yes, I intend to remain, and I intend to help raise this child as though she were my own, from the very beginning." Ronan felt something loosen in his chest at her words, a tension he had carried since the night of the celebration finally beginning to ease. "I did not expect this kind of grace from you," he admitted. "After everything, I would have understood if you chose to walk away entirely." "Walking away would have been the easier path," Seraphine said, rising to her feet. "But I have never been drawn to easy paths, Ronan. I am drawn to paths worth walking, however difficult they prove to be." The ceremony was held 3 days later, in the same great hall where Alira had first delivered her declaration, before the entire court. This time, however, the atmosphere carried none of the shock and scandal of that earlier night. Instead, a solemn dignity filled the space, as Ronan stood before his assembled court, Ren held securely in his arms, Seraphine standing beside him, in formal recognition of her role in the child's future. "Many of you have heard whispers and rumors these past weeks," Ronan began, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "Tonight, I intend to replace those rumors with truth. This child, Ren, is my daughter, born through circumstances beyond either her mother's control or my own. Circumstances that were manipulated by someone within our own walls for reasons they believed served this kingdom's interests." A murmur rippled through the gathered nobles, though none dared interrupt as Ronan continued. "Her mother, Mira, gave her life protecting this child from those who sought to erase her existence entirely. I will not allow that sacrifice to be dishonored through continued silence or shame. Ren is my daughter, recognized fully and completely as part of this kingdom's future, alongside whatever children Lady Seraphine and I may one day welcome into this family as well. He turned toward Elira, who stood nearby, having been granted a place of honor for her role in protecting Ren throughout the months of secrecy. I also wish to formally recognize healer Elira Vance, whose courage in bringing this truth before the court, despite the risk to herself, ensured that justice could finally be pursued for Mira's memory. Elira bowed her head, visibly moved by the acknowledgement, as scattered applause began to build throughout the hall, growing steadily as more of the nobility recognized the sincerity behind Ronan's words. Seraphine stepped forward then, taking Ronan's free hand in her own, as they stood together before the court, a united front, despite everything that had threatened to tear their alliance apart. This kingdom was built on the belief that peace requires sacrifice and honesty in equal measure, she said, her voice clear and strong. Tonight, we honor both. We honor the sacrifice Mira made for her daughter, and we commit to the honesty required to ensure such tragedy never repeats itself within these walls again. The applause grew louder, filling the hall with a warmth entirely different from the shocked silence that had greeted Elira's declaration weeks earlier. Ronan looked down at Ren, who gazed up at him with wide, curious eyes, entirely unaware of the significance of the moment unfolding around her, and felt a fierce protectiveness settle permanently into his heart. Whatever challenges still remained, whatever consequences awaited Garrick and Perrin before the full council's judgment, this moment marked a turning point, a public declaration that truth, however difficult, mattered more than convenient silence within these walls. In the weeks following the ceremony, life within the castle began to settle into a new rhythm, though not without lingering tension. Some among the older nobility continued to whisper about the unconventional circumstances surrounding Ren's recognition, though their objections carried little weight against the growing affection the wider court felt toward the small princess, whose easy laughter and curious nature had begun winning over even the most skeptical members of the household staff. Seraphine visited the nursery daily, spending hours simply sitting with Ren, learning the rhythms of caring for a child, even as she continued preparing for her upcoming marriage to Ronan. Their relationship had shifted noticeably since the crisis began, growing into something steadier and more honest than the careful political arrangement they had entered years earlier. "You are remarkably patient with her," Ronan observed one afternoon, finding Seraphine seated on the nursery floor, engaged in an increasingly complicated game involving wooden blocks that Ren seemed determined to knock over as quickly as Seraphine could stack them. "She reminds me that not everything requires strategy and careful calculation," Seraphine said, laughing as another tower toppled beneath Ren's enthusiastic swat. "Sometimes, the simplest joys matter more than any political consideration." Ronan settled onto the floor beside them, watching his daughter with quiet contentment. "I worried, when Elira first walked into that hall, that everything I had built toward securing this kingdom's future would collapse entirely. Instead, I find myself grateful, in strange ways, for how everything unfolded." "Grateful for scandal and murder?" Seraphine asked, raising an eyebrow, though her tone carried no real accusation. "Grateful for truth," Ronan clarified. "Grateful that Garrick's scheme was uncovered before it could cause further harm. Grateful that Ren found her way into my life, despite everyone's attempts to keep her hidden. And grateful," he added, meeting Seraphine's eyes directly, "that you chose honesty over the easier path of walking away." Seraphine's expression softened at his words, though a comfortable silence settled between them, rather than any need for further conversation. Ren, sensing the shift in attention, crawled determinedly toward Ronan, demanding to be lifted into his arms, with an insistence that made both adults laugh, despite the seriousness of their earlier conversation. Their peace was interrupted by Callum's arrival at the nursery door, his expression carrying the particular urgency Ronan had learned to associate with important council matters. "My king, the full council has assembled to deliver judgment on Garrick and Perrin. They await your presence." Ronan handed Ren gently back to Seraphine, before rising to follow Callum toward the main council chamber, where the assembled elders had spent the previous days reviewing all the evidence gathered against the two men responsible for Mira's disappearance and death. The chamber was tense with anticipation as Ronan took his seat at the head of the table, the eldest council member, a wolf named Osric who had remained neutral throughout the investigation, rising to deliver the council's findings. After careful review of all testimony and evidence presented, Osric began. This council finds Lord Garrick guilty of orchestrating the concealment of a sacred ceremony's true outcome, of directing actions that led directly to the endangerment and eventual death of Mira, and of deceiving his king regarding matters of succession and bloodline. This council recommends permanent exile, stripped of all titles and privileges, with no possibility of return to these lands. Garrick, seated at the far end of the chamber under guard, showed no surprise at the verdict, having clearly expected such judgment, given the weight of evidence against him. He rose slowly when Osric finished speaking, his expression carrying a strange mixture of regret and lingering conviction. I stand by my belief that the alliance's stability mattered more than any individual's circumstances, Garrick said, his voice steady despite the gravity of his situation. I regret the death that resulted from my actions, genuinely and deeply, but I do not regret believing this kingdom's peace worth protecting. Peace built on deception and concealed murder is not peace at all, Ronan said, rising to address him directly. It is merely a fragile illusion, waiting to collapse the moment its foundation of lies is finally exposed. You had years to bring your concerns before me directly, Garrick. Instead, you chose to act alone, deciding for yourself whose life mattered and whose did not. That choice cost Mira everything, and nearly cost my daughter the chance to ever know her father. Garrick lowered his head slightly, offering no further defense as guards moved to escort him from the chamber, his exile to begin immediately, stripped of the title and influence he had wielded for decades. Perrin's judgment followed shortly after, the council recognizing his role as one of following orders rather than originating the scheme, though his complicity in Mira's fear and eventual displacement could not go entirely without consequence. He was sentenced to several years of labor within the kingdom's furthest outposts, a harsh but survivable punishment that acknowledged both his guilt and his eventual cooperation in bringing the full truth to light. As the council chamber emptied, Ronan remained seated for a long moment, feeling the particular exhaustion that followed the resolution of any significant conflict. Justice had been served, as much as justice could be served for a life already lost, but the weight of everything that had transpired still settled heavily across his shoulders. Callum approached quietly, understanding, without needing to be told, that his king required a moment of solitude before returning to the responsibilities awaiting him elsewhere in the castle. "It is finished, my king," he said simply. "One chapter is finished," Ronan corrected gently. "But Mira's memory, and Ren's future, remain ongoing responsibilities I intend to honor for the rest of my reign." He rose from his seat and made his way back toward the nursery, where Seraphine and Ren waited, eager to hear how the council's judgment had unfolded, ready to begin building whatever came next for their unconventional, but increasingly solid family. With Garrick exiled and Perrin sentenced, the immediate turmoil surrounding Ren's arrival began to settle into something resembling normalcy, though Ronan understood that true healing would take considerably longer than any single council judgment could provide. He made it a priority, in the weeks that followed, to properly honor Mira's memory, recognizing that justice for her death required more than simply punishing those responsible. He commissioned a modest memorial to be placed within the castle gardens, a simple stone marker bearing Mira's name, alongside words honoring her sacrifice in protecting her daughter, despite overwhelming circumstances stacked against her. Illyra helped select the location, choosing a quiet corner beneath a flowering tree, where Mira had often spent her rare moments of leisure during her years of service within the castle. "She would have liked this spot," Illyra said softly, standing beside Ronan as workers finished setting the memorial stone into place. She used to say the flowers here reminded her of her childhood village, before circumstances forced her family to seek work elsewhere. "I wish I had known her," Ronan admitted, staring at the newly placed stone. "Even briefly. Even without the mask separating us that night, perhaps things would have unfolded differently if I had recognized her, if I had been given the chance to know the woman carrying my child, rather than remaining ignorant of her existence entirely." "You cannot change what happened," Illyra said gently. "But you can ensure her daughter grows up, knowing her mother's courage, understanding the sacrifice made on her behalf. That legacy matters more than any regret over circumstances neither of you controlled." Ronan nodded slowly, finding some measure of peace in Illyra's words. He knelt beside the memorial, placing a single flower at its base, a quiet gesture of respect for a woman whose bravery had ultimately reshaped his understanding of what leadership truly required. Later that evening, as the castle settled into its usual quiet nighttime rhythm, Ronan found Seraphine in the small private garden attached to her chambers, watching the stars emerge across the darkening sky. Ren slept peacefully in a basket nearby, having been recently fed and settled for the evening by one of the castle's newly appointed nursemaids. "The memorial is finished," Ronan said, settling onto the bench beside her. "I heard," Seraphine replied. "I think it is a fitting tribute, Ronan. Mira deserves to be remembered properly, not simply as a footnote in a scandal that nearly tore apart our alliance." "I have been thinking," Ronan said slowly, "about how we move forward from here. Not just regarding Ren, though her future certainly matters, but regarding us, and what kind of partnership we intend to build together." Seraphine turned to face him fully, her expression curious. "What are you proposing?" "A marriage built on the honesty we discovered through this crisis," Ronan said. "Not the careful political arrangement we entered years ago, built on necessity rather than genuine partnership, but something stronger. I want a wife who challenges me when necessary, who helps me see truths I might otherwise miss, who treats my daughter with the same care and consideration she would show her own children." "I have already shown you that care," Seraphine said softly, "every day since the ceremony recognizing Ren." "I know," Ronan said, "which is exactly why I believe we can build something genuinely strong together, Seraphine. Not despite everything that happened, but perhaps because of how we chose to face it, together, with honesty rather than convenient denial." Seraphine reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his, as they sat together beneath the emerging stars, Ren sleeping peacefully nearby, unaware of the quiet commitment being renewed above her. "Then let us build that future together," Seraphine said. "Properly, this time, with truth as our foundation, rather than mere political convenience." Their wedding, held several weeks later, carried none of the hollow formality that might have once characterized a purely political union. Instead, genuine warmth filled the ceremony, witnessed by a court that had watched their king and future queen navigate scandal and tragedy with a grace that had earned widespread respect throughout the kingdom. Ren, dressed in a small ceremonial gown befitting her status as the kingdom's acknowledged princess, was carried down the aisle by Elira, who had become an integral part of the small family's daily life, her role as healer expanding naturally into something resembling a trusted guardian for the child she had protected through such difficult circumstances. As Ronan and Seraphine exchanged their vows before the assembled court, renewing commitments that had been tested and ultimately strengthened by everything they had endured together, Ronan felt a profound sense of completeness settle over him, different entirely from the triumphant satisfaction he had felt the night of his military victory months earlier. That triumph had proven hollow, shattered within moments by truths he had not been prepared to face. This peace, hard-won through honesty and genuine partnership, felt far more solid, built on foundations that could withstand whatever challenges still lay ahead for their growing family, and their kingdom's continued path toward lasting stability. A year passed swiftly, following the wedding, bringing with it a steady rhythm of growth and healing that neither Ronan nor Seraphine could have fully anticipated during those chaotic weeks, when scandal first threatened to unravel everything they had worked to build. Ren had grown from an infant into a curious toddler, her storm-gray eyes bright with mischief as she explored every corner of the castle grounds, under the watchful care of Elira, and an ever-growing circle of family, who had come to adore her completely. The kingdom itself had settled considerably since Garrick's exile and Perrin's sentencing, the initial shock of scandal gradually replaced by genuine respect for how their king and queen had handled the crisis with transparency rather than convenient denial. Trade flourished along the borders once plagued by conflict between their two packs, and the alliance that had once seemed fragile, threatened by a single night's revelation, now stood stronger than ever, tested and proven resilient through adversity, rather than weakened by it. Ronan stood on the castle's highest balcony, one crisp autumn evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Ren perched happily on his shoulders, her small hands gripping his hair with the fearless confidence only a beloved child could possess. Seraphine joined them shortly after, carrying with her news that would soon require its own celebration, news of another child expected to join their growing family come spring. "She will have a sibling to grow up alongside," Seraphine said, resting a hand gently against her still flat stomach, though the promise of new life already filled her with quiet joy. She will indeed, Ronan said, lifting Ren carefully down from his shoulders to settle her against his chest instead, where she immediately reached for the necklace he wore, a small pendant containing a single pressed flower taken from the memorial garden dedicated to her mother's memory. Mama, Ren said softly, touching the pendant with careful reverence, a word Alira had gently taught her to associate with the memorial stone they visited together every week, ensuring that even at her young age, Ren understood something of the sacrifice made on her behalf, even if the full weight of that understanding would not settle fully until she grew much older. Yes, little one, Ronan murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. Your mother gave you everything, so that you could stand here today, surrounded by people who love you completely. Alira joined them on the balcony moments later, having finished her evening rounds through the healing wards, where she continued her work despite her expanded role within the royal household. She smiled warmly at the sight of the small family gathered together, watching the sunset in comfortable silence. The kingdom has healed remarkably well, she observed, settling beside Seraphine. I did not expect such swift recovery, given how deeply that first night's scandal threatened everything we had built. Truth heals faster than lies ever could, Ronan said, echoing sentiments he had come to believe deeply over the past year. Had we chosen to bury what happened, to quietly dispose of the scandal rather than facing it directly, I believe the damage would have festered far longer, poisoning trust between our people in ways far more difficult to repair than the temporary discomfort of public reckoning. Seraphine nodded in agreement, watching Ren reach curiously toward the darkening sky as the first stars began emerging above the horizon. I think, in strange ways, this entire ordeal made us stronger than we might have become otherwise. We entered this marriage as strangers, bound by political necessity. We built it ultimately on something far more enduring. On truth, Alira offered. On truth, Ronan agreed, and on the courage to face difficult realities rather than hide from them, regardless of the cost such honesty might demand in the moment. As darkness settled fully over the kingdom, torches began flickering to life throughout the castle grounds below, illuminating a peaceful evening, far removed from the chaos and uncertainty that had once threatened to define their reign. Ren yawned sleepily against her father's shoulder, her small eyes growing heavy as the day's excitement finally caught up with her energetic spirit. Ronan carried her inside gently, Seraphine and Alira following close behind, the four of them forming an unlikely but deeply devoted family, bound not by simple bloodlines or political arrangements, but by shared commitment to honesty, protection, and genuine love that had grown steadily stronger through every challenge they had faced together. Somewhere beneath the flowering tree in the castle gardens, Mira's memorial stone stood quiet witness to the peace her sacrifice had ultimately secured, her daughter growing safely into a future filled with love, rather than the fear and uncertainty that had once threatened to define her earliest days. Her memory lived on, not merely in stone and carved words, but in every moment of joy Ren experienced, surrounded by a family determined to honor the courage that had brought her safely into their lives. The kingdom moved forward from that night, forever changed by the truth that had once silenced an entire hall, ultimately strengthened, rather than weakened by the honesty that followed. Ronan Ashcombe had learned, through fire and scandal and eventual healing, that true strength as a king lay not in avoiding difficult truths, but in facing them directly, no matter how deeply they threatened to unravel everything he believed he had built. And in that lesson, hard-won through tragedy, and ultimately transformed into lasting peace, his reign found its truest foundation, one built to endure long after the whispers of that fateful celebration night had finally faded into distant memory.